everyone! So today I figured we'd discuss Sherman Alexie's Reservation Blues, and because I always get carried away in discussions like this, I figured I would split up the video into 3 separate videos. So in the first video I'll be giving a brief summary of the novel, talk about the historical context, and some of the historical facts that are alluded to in the novel. In the second video we'll be talking about identity erasure, and in the third I'll try to apply Homi Bhabha's concept of third space to the novel. So if you're not interested in any of that, I'm really sorry, and I hope to see you for the normal videos. Peace out. Okay, so if you're still here, you probably can't wait to get this party started. So, let's get on with it. Sherman Alexie's Reservation Blues, it starts each chapter with song lyrics, and you'll soon learn the relevance of that. The novel starts with the arrival of Robert Johnson, who is an African-American blues musician, and years ago he made a deal with the devil and he sold his soul in exchange for talent. And now he's trying to outrun this devil, whom he calls the gentleman. So he arrives at the Spokane Reservation at a crossroads, and he gets a lift from one of the Spokane Indians to the bottom of the mountain, because he's in search of Big Mom, the town medicine woman. He's trying to seek refuge with her. He thinks maybe he can help, she can help him escape the gentleman, this devil. So he gets a ride from one of the Spokane Indians, and when he gets out he leaves his guitar in the car. So the Spokane Indian, Thomas, builds the fire, is left with this guitar, which soon speaks to him. It's a magical guitar, and it tells him to form a band with the town bullies Victor Joseph and Junior Plotkin. And of course, when your guitar starts speaking, you'll have to listen. That's one of the rules. So he forms a band with Victor Joseph and Junior Plotkin. The band is called Coyote Springs. They do a lot of performances. They play mostly blues and rock and roll music. They even get groupies after a while. The girls are named Betty and Veronica, and they follow them around everywhere. And we'll talk about the names and the significance of these characters as well. And then they also meet Checkers and Chess Warmwater, 2 Flathead Indian sisters, who also join the band. They do backing vocals and synthesizer. And one of the band members, Thomas, he starts a relationship with one of the Warmwater sisters. So, after a while, after a couple of performances, they're offered to record an album at Cavalry Records in New York City. And they think they're gonna make it big, and they're interested in all the fame and fortune. So they leave the Spokane Reservation, they insult everyone on their way out, because they think they'll never have to come back. But of course, when they get there, in the studio, the magical guitar refuses to play, and they're forced to go home defeated, rejected, and soon they fall prey to all of the conditions that are so genetic almost on these reservations, which are poverty, alcoholism, domestic violence and suicide. So it's pretty horrible on the reservations, and they figured they could escape that, but that didn't really happen. Because the novel focuses on a lot of Native American predicaments, I wanted to look up more of the context and the history of the United States, because I didn't know too much about that. So I looked some stuff up, and I found that one of the first problems is already with the term Indian. It's a term that Christopher Columbus gave the inhabitants when he discovered America in 1492, but he figured that he had reached the Indies. South and East Asia were then called the Indies, and of course he hadn't, so he named the inhabitants Indians. But this term doesn't really refer to any of the customs and traditions of these tribes, so it is a very difficult term, and only in the 1960s did the more politically and historically correct term Native American come into usage, which is also tricky, because it also includes, if I'm not mistaken, Native Hawaiians and American Samoans, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I'm probably not. So a second post-colonial problem is actually the application of the term post-colonialism, and Lewis Owens describes this in his book Native American Representations, so I'll give you a nice quote for this one. America never became post-colonial. The indigenous inhabitants of North America can stand anywhere on the continent and look in every direction at a home usurped and colonized by strangers who from the very beginning laid claim not merely to the land and resources, but to the very definition of the natives. So I think that that's also a bit of a problem, is that these people weren't even allowed to claim the status of natives. It wasn't until 1924 that Native Americans were granted US citizenship, and that they were allowed to vote in elections on land that was essentially theirs. And it came even later, the voting right came even later in New Mexico. I think it only was granted there in 1962. I'm sure that all of you know that a lot of horrible genocides occurred under Columbus, but also under President Andrew Jackson, who used the Indian Removal Act, which was just a piece of legislation to actually justify and legalize the removal of Indians by force to make way for the white settlers. Only in 1984, which is more than 100 years later, they came up with the Indian Reorganization Act, which was supposed to reinstate the rights of many Indians. But it was really that. It was just a charade, it was just an act, and the land was actually quickly taken away again, and Indians were forced to live on reservations. Alright, so before digressing too much and talking about the entire history of the United States, which I do not know that much about, if I wasn't nuanced enough, you can always leave a comment and correct some of the information that I might have misinterpreted. So now I'll just talk about some of the historical facts that you can find in the novel. And one of them, which is often referred to, is the Spokane Battle of Plains of 1858, in which Colonel George Wright and Phil Sheridan defeated the Native Americans, and they slaughtered their horses, took a lot of them captive, and they would later be hanged as well. So this was a very bloody massacre, and it's often referred to in the novel. And not only does Alexie literally refer to it, he also uses the characters of George Wright and Phil Sheridan, and he transformed them into the record label executives who promised Coyote Springs a chance to record an album at Cavalry Records in New York City. So they make these big promises, and of course it doesn't lead to anything, and it actually leads to the downfall of the band in the end. Another connection that would have gone unnoticed to me but was brought up in a master course last year is that of the character Junior Polotkin to the Spokane Indian chief Polotkin. And the connection often goes unnoticed because the name Polotkin is spelled so differently in all the history books. But that's a connection that you definitely can't miss, because this chief was captured by, was it George Wright? This chief was captured by George Wright and later hanged. And it is a very striking parallel, because in the novel, Junior Polotkin ends up, spoiler alert, committing suicide because of the influences of George Wright, who is one of the record label executives responsible for, you know, their record deal and the eventual downfall of Coyote Springs. So Junior, he commits suicide as a cultural as well as personal sacrifice, and we'll talk more about that later. Another important aspect that is often neglected in discussions on reservation blues is that of a gaming culture. It's a really important aspect, and to correctly interpret it, you have to look back at the historical value of gaming for reservation Indians. Because they had tribal sovereignty, which meant that they were recognized as a sort of independent nation with their own justice system and tax system and borders, etc., they were able to get a lot of income from gaming because they didn't have to pay any taxes on it. So gaming and gambling was always a huge source of income for reservation Indians, but they also fell prey to the addiction and the temptation of this whole gambling culture as well. So I think Sherman Alexie really incorporates that into the novel. There's a lot of gaming references throughout the entire novel. You can find references to a traditional Indian stick game, but also in the names of Chess and Checkers Warmwater, the Flathead Indian sisters, whose real names are actually Eunice and Gladys, but they're never referred to as that. So Chess and Checkers are very striking parallels because they're games of capture and strategy, and they involve trying to keep the pieces together, which is something that Chess and Checkers also do. They're very traditional, and they want to keep Indians together. They want to have a pure Indian lineage. The Warmwater sisters' nicknames also allude to one of the most important blues record labels, which is Checkers Records, started by the Chess brothers in 1952, and they soon after that started Chess Records. So both Chess and Checkers were record labels, so that's a pretty cool reference, I think. It's not at all coincidental because of the important aspect of blues in the novel. You can already see that in the title, Reservation Blues, but throughout the entire novel it doesn't really go away. The last gaming reference is in the story of Thomas's father, Samuel Builds a Fire. There's frequent flashbacks to a basketball game between him and the tribal police. And this is really important because the tribal police were actually instated to protect the Indians and are supposed to consist of Indian police officers, which is not really true. There's an officer who claims to have a little bit of Indian blood, but no one really considers him to be a true Indian. So people on the reservation sort of despise the tribal police, and there's a corruption already in the basketball game. The chief changes the rules as he goes along because he feels he can do that because he's chief. And there's a nice passage, I think, that I wanted to mention, which I thought was really funny. They get pulled over by the tribal police for nothing because they weren't doing anything. And the tribal police says, "You two been drinking?" And Lester said, "I've been drinking since I was 5. Kindergarten is hard on a man." "I'll pretend you didn't say that," Wilson said. "And we'll pretend you're a real Indian," Samuel said. I thought that was really funny. On the one hand, you can see the corruption with the tribal police and the nature of the tribal police as a sort of mirroring of the American settlers' claim to nativeness. Or, on the other hand, you can see it as a sort of corruption from within, a sort of betrayal from within. And also, the basketball game foreshadows Samuel's descent into alcoholism, which really shows that something as trivial as a basketball game can lead to debilitating substance abuse, and it doesn't matter how small or big the corruption is, it can always lead to very, very bad circumstances. Alright, so that's it. I hope you liked it. I hope you'll watch the other 2 videos, which will be up in the following weeks. If you have anything to add or questions or something that I didn't nuance enough, you can leave a comment, and I'll see you guys soon. Peace out.